The morning sun cast long shadows across the failed crops of Kepler 442b as Dr. Sarah Chen knelt beside another withered stalk. 3 years since humanity's first agricultural colony had been established on this distant world, and they were still struggling to grow enough food to sustain the growing population. The soil analysis showed promise, the climate seemed suitable, but something fundamental was missing from their understanding of this alien ecosystem. Another failed harvest sector, reported Marcus. Her lead agricultural technician, his voice heavy with frustration, "That's the 6th one this month. At this rate, we'll need to request emergency food shipments from Earth again." Sarah stood, brushing the strange purple soil from her gloves. The colony of New Haven stretched before her, a collection of prefabricated buildings and experimental farms that represented humanity's hopes for expansion beyond their home solar system. 2,000 colonists depended on their success, and so far they were failing spectacularly. "The soil composition is perfect," Sarah muttered, more to herself than to Marcus. "Nitrogen levels, phosphorus, potassium, all within acceptable ranges. The pH is slightly alkaline, but we've adjusted for that. The seeds germinate fine, but then something goes wrong during the growth phase." A soft rustling sound made both humans turn toward the nearby forest edge. The native vegetation of Kepler 442b was unlike anything on Earth, with crystalline bark and leaves that seemed to shimmer with an internal light. The colonists had learned to respect the alien wilderness, knowing little about the creatures that inhabited it. From between the strange trees emerged a figure that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. It stood roughly 8 feet tall with 6 limbs that moved with fluid grace. Its body was covered in what appeared to be natural armor plating, deep green with gold markings that pulsed gently. The head was elongated with large, multifaceted eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Most remarkably, it carried what appeared to be a basket woven from some unknown material, filled with fruits and vegetables that looked surprisingly familiar. Marcus reached for his sidearm, but Sarah quickly placed a restraining hand on his arm. The creature had stopped at what seemed to be a respectful distance, and its posture suggested curiosity rather than aggression. "Don't," Sarah whispered. "Look at what it's carrying. Those look like food crops." The alien being observed them for several long moments, its head tilting slightly as if trying to understand their purpose. Then, to their amazement, it began to speak. The words were clearly articulated, though accented with sounds no human throat could produce. "You struggle with the growing of food," the creature said, its voice carrying a melodious quality despite the strange undertones. "I have watched your attempts from the forest edge. Your methods are incomplete." Sarah's mind raced. First contact protocols demanded that she report this immediately to Colony Command, but something about the alien's demeanor suggested this was an opportunity that might not come again. "You speak our language," she said carefully. "How is that possible?" "We have been listening to your transmissions since your arrival," the alien replied. "My people are quick to learn languages. It is necessary for our survival. I am called Zathari of the 3rd growth cycle. I am what you might term a cultivator." "A farmer?" Marcus asked, his hand still hovering near his weapon. Zathari's head movement suggested something like amusement. "Much more than your understanding of farmer. I work with the living systems of this world. I know why your crops fail." Sarah stepped forward, ignoring Marcus's sharp intake of breath. "Why? What are we doing wrong?" "You treat the soil as dead matter to be manipulated," Zathari explained, setting down her basket. "But this world's soil is alive in ways your science has not yet discovered. There are microscopic symbionts that must be awakened and befriended. Without them, plants cannot access the deeper nutrients they need." "Symbionts?" Sarah's scientific mind was already racing with possibilities. "You mean microorganisms? Bacteria, fungi?" "More complex than your words suggest," Zathari said. "They are partners. They choose whether to help or ignore. Your planting methods anger them. They retreat deeper into the earth where your tools cannot reach." Marcus looked skeptical. "And you can make these partners cooperate?" Zathari's response was to kneel beside one of the failed crop rows. Her forearms moved in an intricate pattern, almost like a dance as she touched the soil at specific points. As she worked, Sarah noticed that the gold markings on her carapace began to pulse more brightly. "I have children to feed," Zathari said as she worked. 14 young ones in my brood chamber. The traditional hunting grounds grow scarce as your settlement expands. But I have watched your people. You are not destroyers by nature. You simply do not understand. After several minutes of her strange ritual, Sithari stood and stepped back. Wait, she said simply. They waited. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly, Sarah noticed a subtle change in the soil color. The purple hue deepened, and she could swear she saw tiny sparkles of light moving just beneath the surface. What did you do? Sarah asked in wonder. I introduced your failed seeds to the deep dwellers, Sithari explained. I told them that humans are not enemies, but potential partners. They are, considering your proposal. As if responding to some unseen signal, tiny green shoots began to emerge from the soil. But these weren't the sickly, struggling plants they had grown accustomed to. These shoots were vibrant, strong, and growing at a rate that defied everything Sarah knew about plant biology. Impossible, Marcus breathed. Not impossible, Sithari corrected. Merely unknown to you. Your people have knowledge of many things, but you have not learned to speak with the living world. We have. It is how we have survived on this planet for countless generations. Sarah's mind was spinning with the implications. You're offering to help us? To teach us? I am offering a trade, Sithari said, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the light of the growing plants. I will handle your crops, human. I will teach your people to work with the deep dwellers, to grow food in abundance on this world, but in return you must keep my children fed. What do they eat? Sarah asked. Sithari gestured to her basket. Many things, but what they need most, what grows scarce in our traditional territories, are the calcium-rich grubs that live in the deep caves. Your mining equipment could reach them easily. Your processed foods also contain nutrients that would benefit my young ones' development. Marcus started to object, but Sarah cut him off with a look. This was bigger than protocol. This was the survival of the colony. I'll need to speak with our leaders, Sarah said. But personally, I think this could be the beginning of something incredible. A true partnership between our species. Sithari's head movements conveyed satisfaction. I will return tomorrow at this same time. Bring your leaders. Let them see what can be accomplished when species work together instead of apart. As the alien cultivator gathered her basket and turned back toward the forest, Sarah called out, Sithari, why help us? Why take this risk? The alien paused at the forest edge. Because I have watched your people work. You do not give up. You try again and again, even when you fail. This tells me you are worthy partners. And because my children's future may depend on learning to live alongside yours. With that, she disappeared into the crystalline forest, leaving Sarah and Marcus staring at the impossible sight of thriving crops growing in soil that had been barren just moments before. The Emergency Colony Council meeting that evening was the most contentious Sarah had ever witnessed. Governor Harrison's face had turned 3 shades of red as he listened to her report, while Security Chief Williams paced the small conference room like a caged animal. Absolutely not, Williams declared for the 4th time. We don't negotiate with unknown alien species. For all we know, this could be some elaborate trap. Maybe they're the reason our crops have been failing in the first place. That doesn't make sense, Dr. Patel, the colony's xenobiologist interjected. If they wanted to harm us, why reveal themselves now? Why offer help? Sarah pulled up the footage from her tablet, showing the time-lapse video of the crops sprouting and growing at impossible speeds. Look at the evidence. In 6 hours, those plants achieved more growth than any of our crops have managed in 6 months. Whatever Sithari did, it worked. Governor Harrison leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The transport from Earth isn't due for another 8 months. If we can't improve our agricultural output, we'll have to implement strict rationing. People are already getting restless about the food situation. Which is exactly why this could be a trap, Williams insisted. They wait until we're desperate, then offer miraculous solutions in exchange for God knows what. Keep my children fed could mean anything. What if they're carnivorous? What if they want to feed on us? She showed us her food basket, Sarah said patiently. Fruits, vegetables, what looked like protein-rich nuts. Nothing that suggested carnivorous preferences. Dr. Reyes, the colony's linguist, looked up from his tablet where he'd been analyzing the recorded conversation. The language patterns are fascinating. Complex grammatical structures, sophisticated vocabulary. This isn't some primitive species. They've been studying us, learning our language with remarkable speed and accuracy. That should worry us more, not less, Williams shot back. Advanced intelligence makes them more dangerous, not safer to deal with. Marcus, who had been quietly listening to the debate, finally spoke up. I've been thinking about what she said, about the microscopic symbionts. What if that's not just alien mysticism? What if there really are complex microorganisms in the soil that we haven't detected yet? Dr. Patel nodded thoughtfully. Our soil analysis equipment is sophisticated, but it's designed for Earth-based ecosystems. We might be missing entirely new forms of life. The point is, Governor Harrison said, raising his hand for silence, we need food production solutions, and we need them now. Dr. Chen, what exactly is this Zathari asking for in return? Sarah consulted her notes. Access to calcium-rich grubs from the deep caves, and some of our processed foods for the nutritional content. She mentioned having 14 children to feed. See? Williams pointed accusingly. 14 offspring. This could be advance reconnaissance for a much larger population. What happens when word gets out that humans are easy marks for food trades? Or, Dr. Patel suggested, this could be the beginning of a mutually beneficial relationship with the native intelligent species of this planet. Think about the implications for long-term colonization success. Governor Harrison stood and walked to the small window overlooking the struggling agricultural sectors. In the distance, they could see the glow from emergency lighting as night shift. Workers continued their futile attempts to coax life from the alien soil. The mining crews report that the deep caves are rich in mineral deposits anyway, he said slowly. Accessing them for grub harvesting wouldn't be a significant deviation from our plans. And we certainly have surplus processed foods we could spare. Governor, I strongly advise against this course of action, Williams said firmly. First contact should go through proper Earth command protocols. We should wait for guidance from home. Earth is 47 light-years away, Harrison replied. Even if we sent a message today, it would be 94 years before we could receive a response. We're on our own out here, and we have to make decisions based on the situation we're facing. Sarah sensed an opportunity. What if we approach this as a limited trial? Small scale, carefully monitored. Zathari said she would return tomorrow. We could negotiate a small demonstration project. If it works, we expand. If there are problems, we reassess. What kind of demonstration? Dr. Patel asked, leaning forward with interest. One agricultural sector, Sarah proposed. Maybe 50 square meters. She helps us establish crops there using her methods, and we provide a small amount of food for her children. We document everything. Monitor for any signs of deception or danger. Williams opened his mouth to object again, but Harrison held up a hand. What would you need to make this work safely? Sarah had been thinking about this all afternoon. A small security detail, medical personnel standing by, full recording equipment to document the process. Dr. Patel to observe and analyze any biological samples. Dr. Reyes to help with communication nuances. And if something goes wrong, Williams demanded. Then we abort the experiment and reassess our options, Harrison said. But if it goes right, we might solve our food crisis and establish contact with a technologically advanced native species. Dr. Reyes looked up from his linguistic analysis. There's something else to consider. The way she structured her sentences, the emotional undertones in her voice when she talked about her children. Everything suggests genuine concern for offspring welfare. That's a powerful motivating factor for cooperation. Parental instinct is universal among intelligent species, Dr. Patel agreed. It's actually one of the most reliable indicators of trustworthy intent. Marcus had been quietly studying the crop footage on his tablet. There's something else. Look at how carefully she worked. The precise points where she touched the soil. The specific patterns of movement. This isn't random alien magic. This is sophisticated agricultural science that we don't understand yet. Governor Harrison returned to his seat and looked around the table at his advisors. Dr. Chen, you'll be the primary liaison. I want you to negotiate the terms of a limited trial. Dr. Patel and Dr. Reyes will accompany you as observers. Security Chief Williams, I want a discreet security presence, but they are not to interfere unless there's immediate danger. Williams looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. And if this goes wrong, it's on your head, Governor. Everything that happens on this colony is on my head, Harrison replied calmly. That's what leadership means. Dr. Chen, what will you tell Zathari tomorrow? Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. That we're interested in a small trial partnership. That we're willing to provide food for her children in exchange for agricultural assistance. That we hope this could be the beginning of a longer relationship between our species. Be specific about the trial terms, Harrison instructed. Make it clear that this is a test of mutual trust and benefit. If it works well, we'll consider expanding the arrangement. Dr. Patel raised a concern. What if she asks about our long-term intentions on this planet? Our plans for expansion? Be honest, Harrison said after a moment's thought. Tell her we're here to build a permanent home for our people, that we want to coexist peacefully with any native species, and that we believe cooperation benefits everyone involved. And if she asks about our technology, our capabilities? Williams added, his security concerns never far from the surface. General information only, Harrison decided. Nothing specific about our defenses or manufacturing capabilities. But we can share information about our peaceful technologies, our scientific goals, our desire to learn about this world. Sarah made notes on her tablet as they talked. What about food preferences for her children? Should I ask about nutritional requirements, potential allergies, or toxins? Definitely, Dr. Patel said. We want to make sure we're providing appropriate nutrition, not accidentally harming alien children. The meeting continued for another hour, working out contingency plans and communication protocols. As they finally prepared to adjourn, Governor Harrison had one final instruction. Remember, people, this could be the most important negotiation in human colonial history. We're not just talking about solving our food crisis. We're potentially establishing the first peaceful relationship between humans and an alien species encountered in their native habitat. The precedent we set here could influence human expansion policy for centuries to come. As Sarah walked back to her quarters through the dimly lit colony corridors, she reflected on the magnitude of what they were attempting. Tomorrow she would be humanity's first official diplomatic contact with an alien species. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. But as she passed the struggling agricultural sectors, seeing the wilted plants and frustrated farmers working under artificial lights, she knew they had little choice. Zithari represented hope for the colony's survival, and perhaps something even more important. Proof that humans could learn to be good neighbors in the vast galaxy they were just beginning to explore. Zithari arrived precisely at the agreed time, emerging from the crystalline forest with the same fluid grace Sarah remembered from their first meeting. This time, however, she wasn't alone. Behind her walked a smaller figure, roughly half her size, with the same six-limbed body structure but brighter, more vibrant coloring. The younger alien's armor plating showed patterns of silver and blue, rather than the gold markings of an adult. I bring my eldest offspring, Kethna, Zethari announced as she approached the waiting human delegation. She wishes to learn about your species, as I learn about your agricultural needs. Sarah stepped forward, acutely aware of the recording equipment and the nervous tension radiating from the security detail positioned discreetly around the test site. Dr. Patel and Dr. Reyes flanked her, their scientific instruments ready to document everything. Welcome, Zethari, and welcome, Kethna, Sarah said, directing the greeting to the younger alien. We're honored that you've brought your child to meet us. Kethna's head tilted in a gesture that seemed to indicate curiosity. When she spoke, her voice was higher pitched than her mother's, with an almost musical quality. Your language has interesting sound patterns. May I ask why your species chooses to communicate primarily through vocal vibrations, rather than pheromone markers? Dr. Reyes nearly dropped his linguistic scanner in surprise. Pheromone communication? Your species uses chemical signals as well as vocalization. Of course, Zethari replied, seeming amused by the question. How else would one convey emotional subtleties and complex relationship dynamics? Your vocal-only method seems limited. We use facial expressions and body language, Dr. Patel explained, unconsciously demonstrating with gestures as he spoke. Visual cues to supplement our verbal communication. Kethna observed his movements with fascination. Crude but effective. I notice your companion behind the metal structure has maintained the same rigid posture since our arrival. Is this a dominance display? Sarah followed the young alien's gaze to where Security Chief Williams stood partially concealed behind a supply container, his hand resting on his sidearm. She felt heat rise in her cheeks at the embarrassment of the situation. No, that's a defensive posture, she explained honestly. Some of our people are concerned about potential dangers from contact with unknown species. It's not personal. We simply don't know each other well enough yet to predict how interactions might unfold. Ah, Zethari said, her tone suggesting understanding, caution born of ignorance rather than hostility. This is wisdom. We too maintained distance from your people, until we could observe your patterns and intentions. How long have you been watching us? Dr. Patel asked, his scientific curiosity overcoming diplomatic protocols. Since your second failed growing season, Zathari replied. We were concerned that your continued soil disturbance might damage the deep networks that sustain our own food forests. But we observed that you were not deliberately destructive, merely uninformed. Kethna had wandered over to examine the test plot Sarah had prepared, her movements showing the same careful grace as her mother's. The soil here is deeply wounded, she observed. The deep dwellers have retreated far below, angry and confused by the mechanical intrusions. Mechanical intrusions? Sarah asked, joining the young alien beside the prepared plot. Your metal tools, Kethna explained, running one of her lower appendages through the soil. They disrupt the electrical networks that the soil organisms use to communicate. It's like, imagine if someone used a device that created random loud noises in your settlement every time you tried to speak to someone. The comparison made perfect sense, and Sarah found herself nodding in understanding. So our farming equipment has been inadvertently creating chaos in an organized underground ecosystem. More than ecosystem, Zathari corrected, moving to stand beside her daughter. Think of it as a vast neural network. The microscopic life forms share information about nutrient availability, water sources, seasonal changes, threats. Your machines create static in their communication channels. Dr. Patel was frantically taking notes. This suggests a level of complexity in soil biology that we never imagined. Can you teach us to work with these networks instead of disrupting them? That is why we are here, Zathari said. But first you mentioned providing nutrition for my offspring. I have brought a sample of what they currently eat so you can understand their dietary needs. She opened her basket and removed several items that made the human scientists lean forward with interest. There were crystalline fruits that seemed to glow with internal light, nut-like seeds with intricate geometric patterns, and what appeared to be dried protein chunks with a texture similar to jerky. The luminous fruits provide essential minerals that support our carapace development, Zathari explained. The geometric seeds contain complex proteins needed for neural pathway growth. The preserved protein supports muscle and organ development. Sarah pulled out her own contribution to the meeting, a selection of human processed foods she'd carefully chosen based on nutritional analysis, protein bars, vitamin supplements, dried fruits, and nuts from earth crops they'd managed to grow in their hydroponic facilities. These contain many of the same nutritional elements, she explained, offering samples to Zathari. High protein content, essential minerals, vitamins for healthy development. Kethna approached the human food with obvious curiosity. May I examine these more closely? Of course, Sarah said, then hesitated. But perhaps your mother should test them first to make sure they're safe for your species? A wise precaution, Zathari agreed, accepting one of the protein bars. She examined it closely, and Sarah noticed that the gold markings on her carapace pulsed slightly as she did so. My biosensors detect no harmful compounds. The protein structure is different from our usual diet, but appears compatible with our digestive systems. She bit into the bar and chewed thoughtfully. Acceptable taste and texture. The mineral content is actually quite impressive, better than many of our traditional food sources. Kethna practically bounced with excitement, a gesture that was surprisingly endearing despite her alien appearance. May I try one now? With her mother's permission, the young alien sampled the protein bar with obvious enthusiasm. The flavor is very interesting, and I can feel the nutritional density. This would be excellent for growing younglings. Now, Zathari said, turning to the test plot, let me show you how to speak with the deep dwellers. What followed was unlike anything Sarah had ever witnessed. Zathari began by placing her 4 hands at specific points around the plot's perimeter, her movements following a complex pattern that seemed part ritual, part precise scientific method. As she worked, the gold markings on her carapace began to pulse in steady rhythmic patterns. I am sending chemical signals through my contact points, she explained as she worked, pheromone messages that identify me as a friend to the soil networks. Each pattern tells them something different about my intentions. Kethna moved to assist her mother, her smaller hands finding their own contact points. The young ones can sense the electrical patterns more clearly, she explained to the fascinated human observers. We're telling the deep dwellers that the surface dwellers here are potential partners, not threats. Dr. Patel's instruments were registering subtle electrical activity in the soil, patterns that shifted and changed as the two aliens worked. Incredible. There really is an organized electrical network down there. Of course, Kethna said almost casually. How did your species achieve agricultural success without learning to communicate with soil life? We didn't know it was intelligent, Sarah admitted. On our homeworld, soil organisms are much simpler. They don't appear to have organized communication networks. Zathari paused in her work to look at Sarah with what might have been sympathy. Perhaps they do, and your species simply never learned to listen. Or perhaps your world's organisms evolved differently. Each planet develops its own patterns of life cooperation. As the two aliens continued their intricate work, Sarah could see subtle changes beginning in the soil itself. The purple color deepened and took on a more vibrant hue. Tiny sparks of light began to move beneath the surface, creating patterns that reminded her of neural activity in brain scans. Now, Zathari announced, stepping back from the plot, we plant. But instead of using seeds from her basket, she looked expectantly at Sarah. Use your own seeds. The deep dwellers must learn to support the plants your people need to grow. We will teach them that these plants are welcome partners in the soil community. Sarah retrieved a packet of wheat seeds from her equipment bag, her hands shaking slightly with excitement and nervousness. Under Zathari's careful guidance, she planted them not in rows as human agriculture typically demanded, but in a spiral pattern that the alien assured her would harmonize with the underground communication networks. As the last seed was planted, Kethna clapped her forehands together in a gesture of completion. Now we wait and see if the deep dwellers accept the new partnership. They didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, tiny green shoots began to emerge from the soil, growing at a rate that defied everything Sarah knew about plant biology. But more than that, the shoots seemed to be growing in response to the electrical pattern still visible beneath the soil surface, creating a harmony between plant and underground life that was beautiful to behold. This is impossible, Dr. Patel whispered, his instruments recording data that would revolutionize humanity's understanding of planetary ecosystems. Not impossible, Zathari corrected gently. Simply unknown to your people. But you learn quickly. I believe this partnership will benefit both our species greatly. As Sarah watched the miraculous growth before her, she realized they were witnessing more than just advanced agricultural techniques. They were seeing a completely different philosophy of how intelligent life could interact with their environment, not as dominators or exploiters, but as partners in a vast, interconnected community of life. 3 weeks after the first successful demonstration, the trial agricultural plot had become the most visited site in the New Haven colony. What had started as 50 square meters of test area now yielded more food than their previous best sector had produced in an entire growing season. Word had spread quickly among the colonists, and Sarah found herself fielding constant requests for expansion of the Alien Partnership Program. The productivity increase is unprecedented, Marcus reported during the morning agricultural briefing. Crop yield is up 400% in the partnership zone. Growth rates are consistent, pest problems are virtually non-existent, and the plants seem to be naturally developing resistance to the local environmental stresses that have been plaguing our other sectors. Governor Harrison leaned back in his chair, a satisfied expression replacing the constant worry lines that had marked his face for months. What about the resource cost? Are we maintaining our end of the bargain without straining colony supplies? Sarah consulted her data tablet. The food exchange is actually working in our favor. Zathari's people require less of our processed foods than we initially estimated, and they've been supplementing our agreement with additional benefits we hadn't anticipated. Such as? Dr. Patel asked, looking up from his xenobiology notes. Kethna has been teaching our younger colonists about plant biology, Sarah explained. She has an intuitive understanding of growth patterns that's helping our agricultural students advance faster than traditional Earth-based education programs ever achieved. And Zathari has identified several native plants that are safe for human consumption and actually provide superior nutrition to some of our Earth crops. The meeting was interrupted by a soft chime from the communication system. Dr. Chen to the main entrance came the announcement. Your guests have arrived. Sarah excused herself and walked quickly to the colony's main entry point, where she found Zathari waiting with not just Kethna, but 2 additional aliens she hadn't met before. One was slightly smaller than Zathari, with similar gold markings but arranged in different patterns. The other was clearly very young, barely reaching Kethna's shoulder height, with bright silver markings that seemed to shift and shimmer as it moved. "Sarah of the Deep Learning," Zathari greeted her, using the name the aliens had adopted for her after witnessing her quick grasp of soil network concepts. "I bring my mate Velthon of the Strong Growth, and my youngest offspring Minka of the Bright Curiosity." "Welcome to our colony," Sarah replied, extending the formal greeting gesture she had learned from Kethna. "We're honored by your presence." Velthon stepped forward and Sarah immediately noticed subtle differences in build and coloring that suggested sexual dimorphism in the alien species. Where Zathari's frame was built for precision and delicate work, Velthon showed more robust musculature and slightly different proportions. "I come to see these humans who have learned to speak with the deep dwellers," Velthon said, his voice carrying deeper tones than his mates. "Zathari tells remarkable stories of your species' adaptability." Young Minka seemed unable to contain her excitement, practically vibrating with curiosity as she examined the human settlement. "Is it true that you traveled between stars to reach this world? Do you really come from a place so far away that light takes many cycles to cross the distance?" Sarah found herself charmed by the young alien's enthusiasm. "Yes, we came from a star system 47 light-years away. It took us many years to travel here, even with our fastest ships." "Incredible!" Minka exclaimed, her silver markings pulsing rapidly. "Our ancestors spoke of other worlds around distant stars, but we never imagined we would meet beings who had actually traveled between them." Zathari's head movement suggested amused tolerance of her youngest child's excitement. "Minka has many questions about your technology and your homeworld. I hope you will not be too annoyed by her curiosity." "Not at all," Sarah replied honestly. "Curiosity is how we learn about each other. We have many questions too." As they walked toward the expanded trial area, Velthon examined the human agricultural equipment with obvious interest. "These metal tools of yours, they are powerful but crude, like using a hammer where delicate touch is needed." "That's essentially what Zathari told us," Sarah agreed. "We're learning to modify our techniques. Dr. Patel has been working on developing new equipment that works with the soil networks instead of disrupting them." They paused at the edge of what was now being called Partnership Sector 1, where the original test plot had been expanded into a thriving agricultural area, unlike anything the human colonists had achieved before. Plants grew in harmonious spirals that seemed to follow the underground electrical patterns, creating a garden that was both highly productive and strangely beautiful. "Your people learn quickly," Velthon observed, examining the growth patterns with obvious approval. "Most species require many generations to understand soil network communication. You have grasped the basics in mere weeks." Kethna had wandered over to where a group of young human colonists were working under the guidance of Dr. Martinez, the colony's agricultural education specialist. Sarah watched with fascination as the alien teenager demonstrated proper planting techniques to the human students, her natural understanding of plant needs bridging the gap between species effortlessly. "There's something I wanted to discuss with you," Sarah said to Zathari as they observed the interspecies education session. "Governor Harrison has authorized me to propose expanding our partnership arrangement." Zathari's attention sharpened. "In what manner?" "We'd like to establish multiple partnership zones throughout our agricultural areas," Sarah explained. "In exchange, we can offer more varied food resources for your people, and we've discovered something else that might interest you." "What have you discovered?" Velthon asked, joining the conversation. Sarah pulled out her tablet and showed them images from the recent deep cave surveys. "Our mining operations have located extensive deposits of the calcium-rich grubs your children need. But we've also found something else down there, vast underground chambers with complex crystal formations that seem to conduct and amplify electrical signals." Zathari and Velthon exchanged a look that Sarah had learned to recognize as significant communication between mates. "You have found the deep singing chambers," Velthon said, his voice carrying a note of awe. "We thought they were legend stories passed down from our ancestors." "Deep singing chambers?" Dr. Patel had approached during the conversation, his scientific curiosity piqued. "Sacred places where the planet's electrical networks converge," Kethna explained, temporarily leaving her human students to join the adults. "Our old stories tell of chambers where one could communicate with the deep dwellers across vast distances, where the soil networks of entire continents could be influenced by a single skilled cultivator. Minka practically bounced with excitement. Could we see them? Could we explore these chambers with your people? Sarah looked at the eager young faces, both human and alien, and felt a surge of possibility. That's exactly what we were hoping you'd say. Governor Harrison believes that joint exploration of these chambers could benefit both our species enormously. How so? Zathari asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. If these chambers really can influence soil networks across large distances, Sarah explained, then partnership cultivators working from these sites could potentially help us establish successful agriculture across the entire continent. And for your people, we could restore the ancient network connections. Velthon finished, his voice carrying obvious excitement. Our ancestors spoke of times when all cultivators across the world could share knowledge instantaneously, when crop failures in one region could be compensated by abundance in another. A global communication and resource-sharing network, Dr. Patel breathed. The ecological implications are staggering. Zathari was quiet for several minutes, her gold markings pulsing in patterns that Sarah had learned indicated deep thought. Finally, she spoke. This would require involving more of our people. The deep singing chambers are not just agricultural tools. They are cultural and spiritual sites for our species. Working with them would need approval from our Council of Elders. We understand, Sarah said. We wouldn't want to proceed with anything that might violate your cultural protocols. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting between your elders and our leadership. I will speak with the council, Zathari agreed. But I believe they will be interested. Our young people grow restless with the limitations of traditional territory. The possibility of expanding our influence, while helping another species, achieve harmony with the planet appeals to our philosophical principles. Minka had been listening intently to the adult conversation, and now she spoke up with the directness that seemed characteristic of the young of her species. Will there be more human children to learn with? And will we be able to travel to the deep singing chambers together? Sarah looked at the young alien's bright, curious expression and felt a warmth that transcended species barriers. I think there will be many opportunities for young humans and your people to learn together. This partnership is growing into something much bigger than any of us initially imagined. As they concluded their meeting and prepare, the descent into the deep singing chambers was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The mining elevator, hastily modified to accommodate both human and alien passengers, carried a mixed group of explorers deeper into Kepler 442b than any human had ventured before. Beside her, Zathari's eldest daughter, Kethna, pressed against the viewing portal with obvious excitement, while two elderly aliens, members of the Council of Elders, observed everything with the careful attention of beings who had lived long enough to be cautious about new experiences. The electrical resonance is growing stronger, reported Dr. Patel, monitoring his instruments as they descended. Whatever's down there is definitely conducting significant amounts of energy. Elder Quantel, a venerable alien whose carapace showed the deep bronze coloring of advanced age, spoke in the formal tones reserved for ceremonial occasions. The songs of our ancestors spoke of places where the planet's voice could be heard clearly, where the whispers of the deep dwellers became the roar of oceans. We believed them to be metaphorical descriptions. Maybe they were more literal than anyone realized, suggested Dr. Martinez, the colony's geologist. If these chambers are natural amplification systems for bioelectrical activity, ancient cultivators might have experienced them as actual auditory phenomena. The elevator shuddered to a stop nearly 2 kilometers below the surface. As the doors opened, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Before them stretched a vast underground cathedral, its walls lined with crystalline formations that pulsed with rhythmic patterns of light. The air itself seemed to hum with electrical activity, and she could feel the hair on her arms standing up in response to the energy fields. By the deep growth, whispered the second elder, Sarveth, her ancient voice carrying notes of awe, the singing chambers are real. Kethna was the first to step out of the elevator, her movements showing none of the usual caution her species displayed in new environments. I can feel it, she said, her voice filled with wonder. The networks, they're so much stronger here. It's like being able to hear every conversation in a vast city all at once. Sarah followed, and immediately understood what the young alien meant. though humans couldn't directly perceive the electrical networks the way Zathari's people could. The chamber had an overwhelming presence that seemed to fill every sense. The crystalline walls created a symphony of reflected light and sound that was both beautiful and slightly disorienting. The formation patterns are extraordinary, Dr. Martinez observed, his geological training helping him maintain scientific focus despite the chamber's overwhelming majesty. These crystals have grown in perfect geometric arrays. This isn't natural formation. This is deliberate construction. Elder Quantel moved forward with surprising grace for his age, approaching one of the larger crystal formations with obvious reverence. Our most ancient stories speak of the first cultivators, those who learned to shape the crystal growth to enhance the planet's natural networks. We thought them myths. Not myths, Zathari said softly, having emerged from the elevator with her mate Velthon and several other alien adults. History that became legend because we lost the knowledge to maintain what they built. The chamber was enormous, easily large enough to house the entire New Haven colony. Pathways of polished stone wound between crystal formations, suggesting that this space had been designed for regular use by large numbers of individuals. More remarkably, Sarah could see that the crystal arrays extended far beyond the main chamber, disappearing into tunnel networks that probably honeycombed the entire region. "Look at this," called Dr. Patel from near one of the larger formations. "The crystals are responding to our presence. The light patterns are changing, becoming more active." He was right. As more of their group entered the chamber, the crystalline formations began to pulse with increasing intensity. The patterns of light seemed to flow from crystal to crystal, creating waves of illumination that swept across the vast space in complex, beautiful patterns. Kethna approached the formation Dr. Patel was examining, her 4 hands extended toward the crystal surface. "It's trying to communicate," she said with excitement. "The chamber is asking who we are, why we've come here. Can you answer it?" Sarah asked, fascination overcoming any concern about the strangeness of the situation. "We can try," Elder Sarveth said, moving to join Kethna beside the crystal formation. "But this will require cooperation between our species. The chambers were built to amplify cultivator abilities, but they respond to unified intention. If humans and our people work together, what do you need us to do?" Governor Harrison asked. He had insisted on joining the expedition despite security concerns, recognizing that this moment could define the future relationship between the two species. Elder Quantel gestured for the humans to position themselves around the central crystal array. "Place your hands on the crystal surfaces as we do. You cannot directly communicate with the deep dwellers as our people can, but your bioelectrical fields can support and amplify our efforts." Sarah found herself standing beside Velthon, her palms pressed against the warm, smooth surface of a crystal that stood nearly 3 meters tall. Around the circle, humans and aliens alternated, creating a mixed group unlike anything either species had imagined possible just months before. "Think of growth," Zathari instructed the humans. "Picture plants thriving, soil teeming with life, abundance spreading across the land. The chambers respond to intention as much as to biological capability." As Sarah focused her thoughts on images of successful crops and thriving ecosystems, she began to feel something she had never experienced before. Through the crystal surface, she could sense a vast network of connections spreading out in all directions. It was as if the chamber was showing her the planet's hidden nervous system, the underground web of communication that connected every growing thing across the continent. "Incredible," breathed Dr. Patel, his scientific training warring with the mystical nature of what they were experiencing. "I'm actually perceiving the network structure. It's like seeing a map of the planet's entire biological communication system." The crystal formations around them were now blazing with light, creating patterns so complex and beautiful that Sarah found herself fighting back tears. Through the shared connection, she could feel the wonder and joy of her alien partners, their excitement at rediscovering abilities their people had lost for generations. But more than that, she could sense something else responding to their unified call. Deep in the planet's crust, vast networks of microscopic life were awakening. Systems that had been dormant for countless years were coming back online, and connections that spanned continents were being reestablished. "The continental network is responding," Elder Quantel announced, his voice carrying amazement despite his advanced years. "Connections that have been broken for 1,000 cycles are healing themselves. Kethna's young voice carried pure joy. I can feel cultivators on the other side of the world. There are others of our people, separated groups we lost contact with generations ago, and more than that, Velthon added, his deeper tones resonating through the crystal medium. The network is showing us optimal locations for new agricultural centers, places where human crops could thrive if properly integrated with the soil communities. Sarah was overwhelmed by the flood of information flowing through the crystalline network. She could perceive potential farming sites scattered across the continent, each one highlighted by the deep dwellers as suitable for the kind of partnership agriculture they had developed. The implications were staggering. Enough agricultural potential to support not just the current New Haven colony, but dozens of similar settlements. This changes everything, Governor Harrison said, his voice heavy with the weight of realization. We're not looking at sustainable agriculture for one colony. We're looking at the foundation for human civilization on this entire planet. Elder Sarveth's ancient wisdom tempered the excitement, but only if the partnership continues. The networks will not maintain themselves without ongoing cooperation between our species. This is not a gift that can be taken. It must be earned continuously through mutual respect and shared effort. As their session in the chamber continued, Sarah began to understand the true magnitude of what they had discovered. The deep singing chambers weren't just communication devices or agricultural tools. They were the technological and spiritual heart of an entire civilization's relationship with their world. And now, for the first time in the planet's history, two species were learning to share that relationship. There's something else, Kethna said suddenly, her young sensitivity to the network patterns apparently detecting something the adults had missed. The chambers are showing us warning signs, environmental stresses in other regions, climate changes that could affect the global networks. Dr. Martinez, whose geological expertise had been invaluable throughout the expedition, looked up from his instruments with concern. What kind of environmental stresses? Seismic activity in the eastern continent, Elder Quantel translated, his connection to the network allowing him to interpret the warnings more clearly. Volcanic events that could disrupt network connections across vast regions, and chemical contamination from what appears to be industrial activity. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. Industrial activity? Are there other species on this planet with advanced technology? No, Zathari said, her tone carrying a note of confusion. But the network patterns suggest artificial contamination, chemical signatures that don't match any natural planetary processes. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Other human settlements. There must be other colony ships that have reached this planet. Governor Harrison's expression was grim, and if the planetary network is detecting chemical contamination from their activities, they're not following sustainable practices. Elder Sarveth spoke with the weight of long experience. If other groups of your people are damaging the network connections, it could eventually compromise everything we've built here. The planetary systems are interconnected. Damage in one region affects all others. Sarah looked around the chamber, at the magnificent crystal formations that represented thousands of years of careful cultivation and environmental harmony. The thought that other human settlements might be unknowingly destroying this incredible system filled her with a sense of urgent responsibility. We need to find them, she said quietly. We need to teach them what we've learned here, show them how to work with the planet instead of against it. Agreed, Governor Harrison said. But first, we need to make sure our own partnership is strong enough to serve as a model for others to follow. As they prepared to conclude their first session in the deep singing chambers, Sarah realized that their discovery had transformed their mission from simple survival to something far more significant. They were no longer just trying to establish a human colony on an alien world. They were working to become the first example of how two very different species could learn to share a planet as true partners in its care and cultivation. The crisis arrived on a Tuesday morning when the long-range sensors detected incoming spacecraft signatures. 3 vessels clearly of human origin, but with configurations that didn't match any ships from the New Haven colonization fleet. Governor Harrison called an emergency meeting that included not just the human leadership, but also Zathari, Elder Quantel, and several other key figures from the alien community. The ships will arrive within 48 hours, reported Communications Officer Torres, her voice tight with tension. They're broadcasting standard human identification codes, but they're not responding to our hails. We can't establish communication. Ship configurations suggest a military or corporate expedition, Security Chief Williams added, his earlier skepticism about alien cooperation now replaced by concern about human threats. Heavy industrial equipment, multiple lander craft, and what appears to be automated mining systems. Elder Quantel's bronze carapace had taken on a darker hue, a sign Sarah had learned indicated serious concern among his people. The deep dwellers report increasing disturbance in the planetary networks. Chemical contamination is spreading from the eastern continents, where these visitors have apparently established operations. How bad is the contamination? Dr. Patel asked, though his expression suggested he already feared the answer. Sithari consulted with her mate Velthon in rapid pheromone communication before responding. The damage is not yet irreversible, but it spreads daily. Traditional human industrial techniques appear to be poisoning the soil networks across vast areas. If it continues unchecked, the entire planetary ecosystem could collapse, Governor Harrison finished grimly. How long before the damage reaches our region? Perhaps a year, perhaps less, Elder Sarveth replied, her ancient wisdom carrying the weight of certainty. The network connections we re-established through the deep singing chambers make our region more resilient, but they also make us more vulnerable to systemic damage from other areas. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. As the primary liaison between the two species, she understood better than anyone how fragile their partnership still was, and how much was at stake. We need to make contact with the incoming ships, she said. We need to show them what we've accomplished here, demonstrate that there's a better way to establish human presence on this planet. And if they're not interested in cooperation? Williams asked bluntly. Corporate expeditions aren't known for environmental sensitivity, especially when there are profits to be made. Before anyone could respond, young Kethna entered the meeting chamber with obvious urgency. Her silver and blue markings were pulsing rapidly, indicating high stress levels. Mother Elders, human friends, she said, addressing the assembly with the formal politeness her people used in crisis situations. I bring word from the deep singing chambers. The network has detected something important about the approaching ships. What kind of information? Sarah asked, leaning forward with interest. The ships carry many humans, but also others. The bioelectrical signatures suggest multiple species aboard those vessels. Some are familiar, patterns that match spacefaring species known to the ancient network memories, but others are completely unknown. Elder Quantel's head movements indicated surprise. Multiple species working together? This is unexpected. Governor Harrison looked puzzled. Our intelligence suggested that humans were the only species in this region of space with interstellar travel capabilities. If these ships are carrying aliens, perhaps our information was incomplete, Dr. Patel suggested. Or perhaps these are representatives of species from much more distant regions. Williams' security training kicked in immediately. This changes the tactical situation completely. We're not just dealing with potentially hostile humans, we're looking at an unknown number of alien species with unknown capabilities and intentions. Not necessarily hostile, Sarah interjected. If multiple species are traveling together, it suggests they've found ways to cooperate. That could actually work in our favor. Sithari had been listening quietly to the discussion, but now she spoke with the authority of someone who had spent months observing human behavior patterns. There's another possibility to consider. What if these ships represent refugees? Refugees? Governor Harrison asked. From what? The chemical contamination patterns the network has detected. They are not consistent with careful resource extraction, Velthon explained. They suggest desperate, rapid mining operations, the kind that prioritize speed over sustainability. Elder Sarveth's ancient voice carried a note of sadness. We have seen such patterns before in our own history. When ecosystems collapse due to poor stewardship, survivors often flee to new territories with whatever resources they can gather quickly. The implications of this possibility struck Sarah immediately. If they're refugees, then they might be more willing to learn sustainable practices. Desperation could make them open to cooperation rather than conquest. Or it could make them more dangerous, Williams countered. Desperate people take desperate actions. Young Minka, who had been quietly listening from beside her sister, suddenly spoke up with the direct honesty characteristic of her age. Why don't we ask them? When they arrive, we could offer to meet and explain what we've learned here. The simple wisdom of the suggestion seemed to cut through the adults' complicated strategizing. Sarah found herself smiling despite the tension of the situation. Minka has a point, she said. Instead of speculating about their intentions, we should focus on presenting our partnership as a viable alternative to whatever brought them here. Agreed, Governor Harrison said after a moment's consideration. Dr. Chen, I'm placing you in charge of first contact protocols with the incoming ships. You have more experience with interspecies diplomacy than anyone else in the colony. What about preparation? Williams asked. Should we mobilize defensive measures? Elder Quantel's response surprised everyone. We will contribute to defensive preparations, but not in the manner you might expect. The deep singing chambers can be used to coordinate network responses across the continent. If necessary, the soil life can be convinced to reject attempts at destructive mining. The planet itself could resist harmful activities? Dr. Martinez asked, his geological training struggling to process the implications. To some extent, Zithari confirmed. The deep dwellers can make soil infertile, can redirect water sources, can even trigger certain types of seismic activity. But such measures are dangerous and difficult to control. They should be used only as a last resort. Sarah looked around the mixed assembly of humans and aliens, struck by how naturally they had come to work together in addressing the crisis. Then let's focus on the positive approach first. We'll prepare a comprehensive presentation of our partnership model: agricultural success, interspecies cooperation, sustainable resource management. We'll show them that there's a better way to build a future on this planet. And if they reject cooperation, Williams pressed. Then we'll deal with that situation as it develops, Governor Harrison replied. But I agree with Dr. Chen that we should lead with our strengths rather than our fears. Kethna had been consulting quietly with the other young aliens present, and now she spoke up again. The network suggests that the approaching ships will need to establish ground operations quickly. Their life support systems show signs of strain. We could offer immediate assistance with sustainable resource acquisition, food, water, breathable atmosphere processing. Using our partnership techniques to solve their immediate survival needs, Sarah mused. That could demonstrate the practical benefits of cooperation much more effectively than any theoretical presentation. But it would also reveal our capabilities, Williams warned. Information that could be used against us if negotiations break down. Elder Sarveth spoke with the patient wisdom of long experience. All cooperation involves risk. But the alternative, allowing multiple species to damage the planetary networks through ignorance or desperation, poses much greater dangers to everyone. As the meeting concluded and various groups dispersed to begin their preparations, Sarah found herself walking with Zithari toward the agricultural sectors. The sight of thriving crops growing in harmony with the planet's natural systems reminded her of how much they had accomplished in such a short time. Are you concerned about the outcome? Zithari asked as they paused beside Partnership Sector 3, where human and alien children were working together to tend an experimental grove of hybrid Earth-Kepler plants. Sarah considered the question carefully. I'm concerned about the risks, she admitted, but I'm also excited about the possibilities. If we can convince these new arrivals to join our partnership model, we could be looking at the first truly multi-species civilization in human history. And if we cannot convince them? Sarah watched as young Minka patiently taught a group of human children how to sense the electrical patterns in soil that indicated healthy deep dweller activity. Then we'll still have built something worth protecting, and we'll have proven that cooperation between very different species is not just possible, but profitable for everyone involved. The next 48 hours would determine whether their experiment in interspecies partnership could survive its first major test. But as Sarah looked at the evidence of successful cooperation surrounding her, she felt a quiet confidence that they had built something strong enough to weather whatever challenges the incoming ships might bring. The ships arrived exactly when predicted, settling onto the designated landing areas with the controlled precision of desperate but disciplined crews. Sarah watched from the observation deck as the three vessels powered down their engines, noting the scorched hull plating and emergency patches that spoke of a difficult journey. Governor Harrison stood beside her, along with Zithari, Elder Quantel, and a carefully chosen delegation representing both species. The lead ship is broadcasting a standard diplomatic request, Communications Officer Torres reported. They're asking for immediate meeting with colonial authority figures. The message is urgent. Patch them through to the main speaker, Harrison instructed. The voice that emerged from the communication system was human, but strained with exhaustion and stress. New Haven Colony, this is Captain Elena Vasquez of the Interspecies Refugee Fleet. We carry representatives of 4 different species, including humans from the failed Kepler 186F colonies. We have critical information about system-wide ecological collapse events and urgent need for resource assistance. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Kepler 186F had been one of the first successful human colony systems, established nearly a decade before New Haven. If it had failed, Captain Vasquez, Governor Harrison responded. This is Governor Harrison of New Haven Colony. We're prepared to offer assistance and would like to arrange immediate meetings. Can you provide information about your passenger manifest and immediate needs? We carry 437 individuals across 4 species, came the reply. Humans from 3 different failed colonies, Centauri refugees from the Vega system, Corvani survivors from destroyed mining worlds, and a small group of Thes diplomatic exiles. Our immediate needs are food, medical supplies, and temporary housing. But Governor, we need to discuss something much more urgent than our survival. We've traced a pattern of ecological disasters that threatens every inhabited planet in this galactic region. Elder Quantel's bronze carapace darkened further, and Sarah could see similar stress responses among the other aliens present. This confirms our worst fears, the Elder said quietly. The network disturbances we've detected may be symptoms of a much larger crisis. We'll meet with Captain Vasquez and her delegation immediately, Harrison decided. Dr. Chen, I want you to coordinate first contact protocols. This situation is exactly what we've been preparing for. 2 hours later, Sarah found herself in the largest meeting chamber in New Haven Colony. Facing the most diverse group of intelligent beings she had ever seen, Captain Vasquez was a weathered woman, whose eyes carried the weight of having lost entire worlds. Beside her sat a Centauri female, whose crystalline exoskeleton and multiple sensory appendages marked her as clearly non-human, yet whose posture conveyed obvious intelligence and determination. The Corvani representative was shorter and more heavily built, with rock-like skin and the deep rumbling voice of a species adapted to high-gravity worlds. The Thes delegate was perhaps the most alien of all, appearing as a collection of shifting, luminescent patterns that somehow cohered into a communicating entity. The pattern began 3 years ago, Captain Vasquez explained, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen too much and learned hard lessons. Kepler 186F experienced sudden catastrophic failure of all agricultural systems. Within 6 months, the soil networks that had supported our farming communities for nearly a decade simply died. The Centauri representative, who had introduced herself as Christarch Velanan, added her own observations. Similar collapses occurred across the Vega system colonies. Our people, who had successfully adapted to 12 different planetary environments, suddenly found ourselves unable to maintain basic ecosystem stability anywhere. The mining world showed the most dramatic effects. The Corvani, General Thokmar, continued. Entire planetary crusts became unstable overnight. Seismic events that made continued habitation impossible, as if the planets themselves were rejecting our presence. The Thes delegate's communication was more complex, conveying meaning through coordinated light patterns that Dr. Reyes was frantically trying to translate. Lightweaver Synthhull reports that their homeworld experienced what can only be described as a breakdown in the fundamental connection between consciousness and planetary environment, he interpreted. Their species' telepathic bond with their world was severed completely. Sarah felt a chill of understanding. You're describing the collapse of planetary consciousness networks, the breakdown of the complex relationships between intelligent life and planetary ecosystems. Exactly, Captain Vasquez confirmed. And we've identified the cause. A species called the hegemony has been systematically spreading across this galactic region, introducing industrial and military technologies that are fundamentally incompatible with the types of ecological networks that most habitable planets depend on. Zathari had been listening intently to the discussion, and now she spoke with obvious concern. The contamination patterns we detected through our own planetary network, they match what you're describing. If your sensors are detecting chemical and electrical disruption spreading from other continental regions, then yes, Christark Velanen replied. The hegemony has probably already established operations on this planet. Elder Quantel's ancient voice carried notes of both sadness and determination. Then the question becomes whether the damage can be stopped and reversed, or whether we must prepare for another evacuation. That's exactly why we came here, Captain Vasquez said. Our long-range sensors detected something unprecedented on Kepler 442b. Active coordinated resistance to hegemony-type contamination. Planetary networks that were not just surviving the initial damage but actually healing and strengthening. Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with responsibility. That's the partnership system we've developed. Cooperative relationships between human colonists and the native intelligent species, working together to maintain and enhance planetary network stability. The reaction from the refugee delegates was immediate and intense. The Zentari's crystalline structure brightened significantly. The Corvani leaned forward with obvious interest, and the Thes delegates' light patterns accelerated into what Dr. Reyes interpreted as excitement. Interspecies ecological partnership, Christark Velanen said with something approaching reverence. We theorized that such cooperation might be possible, but we never encountered a successful example. How stable is your system? General Thakmar asked. Could it be expanded to support additional species and larger populations? Sarah looked at Zethari and Elder Quantel before responding. We believe it can be scaled up significantly. The deep singing chambers, the planetary network amplification systems, have the capacity to coordinate ecosystem management across entire continents. But it requires ongoing cooperation and mutual respect from all participants. And willingness to abandon traditional extraction-based resource management, Zethari added. Partnership, agriculture, and sustainable resource sharing instead of exploitation. Lightweaver. Senthol's patterns conveyed what Dr. Reyes translated as intense curiosity about the psychological and spiritual aspects of interspecies cooperation, particularly regarding the maintenance of distinct cultural identities within shared ecological frameworks. What about defense? Captain Vasquez asked, her military background showing through. The hegemony doesn't negotiate. They simply expand, and they have weapons and technologies that can devastate planetary ecosystems from orbit. If they're already established on this planet, they'll eventually move to eliminate any competition. Elder Quantel exchanged glances with Zethari before responding. The planetary networks, when functioning at full capacity, are not defenseless. Coordinated ecosystem responses can disrupt mechanical systems, redirect energy flows, even influence weather patterns. But such measures require precise cooperation between all network participants. You're talking about turning the planet itself into a defensive system, General Thakmar said with obvious admiration. My people would find such an approach appealing. Governor Harrison, who had been quietly listening to the discussion, finally spoke up. It sounds like we're talking about expanding our partnership model into something much larger than any of us originally envisioned. A true multi-species civilization based on ecological cooperation, rather than resource extraction. The question is whether we can accomplish that expansion quickly enough to counter the hegemony's established operations, Captain Vasquez pointed out, and whether we can convince other refugee populations to adopt partnership approaches instead of falling back on traditional survival strategies. Sarah looked around the room at the diverse collection of beings who had somehow found themselves working together toward a common goal. I think we have to try. The alternative is watching everything we've built here get destroyed, along with the hope of sustainable interspecies cooperation. Then we begin immediately, Zethari declared, her tone carrying the authority of someone who had spent months building trust between very different species. We will share our techniques, expand the partnership sectors, and teach everyone how to work with the planetary networks. And we will use the deep singing chambers to coordinate resistance against the contamination that's already spreading, Elder Quantel added. It will be difficult and dangerous, but it may be possible to heal the damage and prevent further ecological collapse. Young Kethna, who had been quietly listening from beside her mother, suddenly spoke up. The network is responding to the presence of so many different species. It's excited. The deep dwellers are curious about forming partnerships with beings they've never encountered before. Sarah felt a surge of hope and determination. 6 months ago, she had been a desperate agricultural scientist trying to save a failing colony. Now she found herself helping to coordinate what might become the first truly multi-species civilization in the galaxy's history. One based on cooperation, sustainability, and respect for the complex relationships that made life possible. The future was still uncertain, with the hegemony threat looming and massive challenges ahead. But as she looked at the mixed group of humans and aliens working together to find solutions, Sarah knew they had built something worth fighting for. They had proven that cooperation between very different species wasn't just possible. It was the key to survival and prosperity in a galaxy full of diverse life. The partnership that had begun with a simple agreement to trade food for agricultural knowledge had grown into something that could reshape the galaxy's approach to colonization, resource management, and interspecies relations. And it had all started with Zathari's simple but profound declaration: "I'll handle your crops, human. Just keep my children fed."